I started writing fiction as a child at 12, and was a huge Ray Bradbury fan, and was kind of the horror bug bit me early on. One of my favorite film as a kid was Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, which I've seen more than anything else other than maybe A Hard Day's Night. And I was lucky enough that my first hire was by Steven Spielberg. I was doing publicity for various studios and the like, specializing in the sci-fi, horror, fantasy genre, and had done some making of documentaries where I hired myself because it was just cheaper than hiring somebody who knew how to do it. No worries. And so that first opportunity came when I had been interviewing Steven for a small pay TV channel in LA called the Z Channel way back when. And he and his people had read something that I'd written and liked it a lot, and they called and asked me to write what it turns out was the first script ever written for the series Amazing Stories back in 1985. And so that opened the door to me. Suddenly, the people who had never read anything of mine were offering me jobs, and still never having read anything of mine, but I'd been knighted by King Stephen, so that was all they needed. So that was my first opportunity, and it turned the next year of the second season of Amazing Stories. Stephen asked me to direct one of my stories, and so that was an opportunity, another door that opened up to me, and being able to deliver something I could be proud of and something that they were looking for, and you know, be accessible and all. It just really worked out well, and I've been working ever since, first as a writer, then as a director and writer, and then to protect myself, I became a producer, and that has led me in different directions as well, creating television series myself, and movies, and things like that. So, I mean, that's the very quick story of the last 35 years. So, I don't know if you'd just like to ask questions, or what format you'd like this to take, Eric? It's easier for me to respond to something than to just, yeah.
Okay. So did you start out in LA, or what was the first?
I actually was born in Los Angeles, and I'm probably the only gray-haired person born in LA. But nobody in my family had ever worked in the industry. We were very, blue-collar working family. My parents were divorced at 12, and, it was not a plush, easy Hollywood life at all. We lived in the San Fernando Valley. It was, I never imagined that it would be possible to make a living doing this. And I was in a band in the 70s, and that was where my first interest lay, but I was still writing the whole time. And I thought, I'm going to be a rock star, and then I'll direct movies. It didn't quite work out that way. But no, living in Los Angeles is definitely an advantage because you have access to people, easy access. The internet didn't exist then, but even with the internet, there's nothing like having a meeting with somebody and getting them excited about your work and the like. But that's hard to do because everybody wants to do that, and it's luck and timing and the ability to deliver what people would be interested in, and it helps to be able to do it through an agent. But LA, it is an important place to be. You can make short films or feature films or whatever anywhere around, and if they're fantastic, take it to people who are based in Los Angeles or New York or Toronto or London or whatever. But if you're trying to establish yourself, it's a great place to be able to do that. Yes, sir.
Basically, what's the difference in when you came up in the industry and the industry now?
That's a great question. It really is. The question was, what's the difference between when I started in the industry and what it's like now? There was no internet. Everything was shot on film. There was no digital post-production. You can make a great-looking independent movie for next to nothing on your iPhone. I mean, Steven Soderbergh made Unsane on the iPhone 7, and it looks great. It's a really good movie. The strength of your story, your ideas, your visual polish and your audio quality, you're capable of doing Hollywood quality work technically, which you could not do in those days. Shooting on film was complicated, but the state of the industry is very different because of all the delivery platforms. Very few independent films ever reach movie theaters. Now, the franchise is king. The Marvel universe, the DC universe, sequels. Movies are more theme park rides now, where you get something from a giant theatrical experience, whether it's IMAX 3D or whatever. That's what movie-going has become. And the smaller storytelling has migrated to television or YouTube or online. I think television is now better than it's ever been, ever. And creatively, movies can reach that same high, but most of the attention seems to be going into production value and size and hugeness and that theme park ride where you're having a real roller coaster experience, but it's not something you necessarily take home with you as the complexity of the characters, people you identify with, a story that takes you somewhere unexpected. It's a big explosive show.
Okay, so it's safe to say that you'd have to choose what demographic you want to go into as well as you just say as reality TV or because it's so open now.
Well, yeah, there are so many different genres and directions that you can go, but it's what your passion is about, what you feel. There is reality TV, and that can be anywhere from, I just did my first thing ever on a reality show. I was a guest judge on Halloween Wars on the Food Network. That was really freaking bizarre. But, my passion is narrative film and television, mostly within the horror genre, but that also, you become limited in horror jail somehow, because that particular genre is not as respectful and the like as drama, comedy, westerns and the like. But there's so many different ways to do it. If I don't know how I would start as an independent filmmaker now, because it's so hard to get beyond online delivery. You can put your movies on YouTube. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? It's very difficult. At least when I was young and starting and getting into it, there were a lot less opportunities and channels, but they were more specific. They weren't as ethereal. So you can have a YouTube sensation and, then try and make a feature film, and it can either work or not work. But now you have the tools at hand to impress people. And my number one recommendation is don't hire your friends to act in your movie. It's the surest sign of an amateur production is amateur actors. Here you've got film school, here you've got classes, you've got access to actors that you would audition and the like. I'm going a little off kilter, but it is a matter of just making something that's not, you don't say, well, that's really good for $500, because nobody cares. You don't put that in your opening credits, this movie will only cost $500. It's your movie is starting, and it's engaging, or it's not. And you can't use that excuse and get away with it. But there's so many ways in. Netflix has now become, if you'll pardon the phrase, starfuckers like HBO did. They want a lot of feature filmmakers who would never think of television want to do Netflix because that's what everybody watches, and the same with Amazon and the same with HBO and Epix and all these places. So it's become more difficult for an independent filmmaker to enter as well. So the theatrical is tough, the streaming is tough, YouTube is always there, but how do you make money off of it? It's a very good friend who edited a movie of mine. He's a terrific writer-director of movies you've known and seen and liked, but he edits to make his living because he can't make a living as a writer-director. It's a very, very strange world now. So I mean to be encouraging, not discouraging, but it's out there, yeah.
What are some of the major misconceptions about the glamorous, like in Hollywood it kind of seems like filmmaking is so glamorous, so, polished. What are some of the major misconceptions for amateur filmmakers going into the big?
Okay, the misconceptions about Hollywood and its glamour is, first of all, every day, a short day is 12 hours long. Um, it's long, long working days, and if you're not a movie star, I've worked with movie stars and non-movie stars and television stars and non-stars and the like. The work is just as hard. There are people who have reached the top of that ladder who can do whatever they want, get just the green M&Ms in their ball, in their trailer, who get the trailer and all of that. Or there are people at the top, not to name drop, but I will. George Clooney was my next door neighbor for several years before he really hit it big on ER and then beyond. And the first season of ER, he was there. He'd been working for years on more failed pilots than any other actor around. And making it that much later, when he started to go salt and pepper gray, it gave him a perspective that somebody who makes it at 21 doesn't have. But the misconception is that it's easy to live that life if you're just good. But it's really hard work to make movies. Even bad movies are really just as hard to make as good movies. And the misconception also is if you offer so-and-so whatever their pay is, that they'll take it and then you've got your movie underway. It's a matter, are they available? Do their agents think it's right for their careers at the right time, the right place? That you run into movie stars and they'll be receptive to your script, or directors or producers go, I've got this great script I think you'd be great for. You're never going to get that opportunity one-on-one like that. They have walls of protection around them because they need them. But that said, I was born in L.A., grew up in the Valley, a little, tiny family house and the like. And it's right next to the glitz and glamour. And it's made a real world of haves and have-nots. There's not a whole lot of middle ground there. And so for struggling artists, it's the place to be, but it can be a cruel city. And some of the biggest egos I've seen have been the wannabes, not the people who are already there. But there are so many people trying to make it that there are a lot of groups, the horror community in particular, of people who are interested in that, and I can speak best about that because that's where I lived most of my life, is in that community. A lot of filmmakers, actors, writers are competitive with one another and don't want them to succeed. They live on Schadenfreude. And but there are equal amounts of people who feel like I do, that the more people who make it, the more movies that are successful, the more openings for those movies there are. So I'm not a networker, but I totally understand that. And the idea of like-minded people getting together, working together, exchanging ideas together and all of that stuff, there's a lot of that in that community in particular. So I may have gone way around your question, but that's kind of the deal. Yeah.
Going back to the point you made about making sure that you can deliver for stories and content that people are interested in, as someone who's primarily a horror writer, have you found yourself sort of tailoring what you write to match trends in the industry, like zombies or vampires?
Right. Well, if you try to cash in on a trend, the trend is going to be done by the time you've done it. For me, anyway, and I've written lots of stuff that hasn't sold, and I'm not much of a writer for hire. I don't do that much because I don't really want to or need to. But if you're interested in it and passionate enough, then assume that everybody is. Because what I think people who read a script want is to be taken by surprise, is to read something that feels fresh, that grammar matters, that you are compelled to turn the next page because you can't wait to see what happens, because you're charmed by the dialogue of the characters, and that each of the characters is written distinctly from one another. So I think more of just making something really engaging and compelling is more important than choosing a genre. If you were to choose a zombie movie right now, for me, I don't ever want to see another zombie movie. The only thing worse to me would be a found footage zombie movie. And that trend, but somebody will come up with something fresh, like Train to Busan or something like that, the Korean film, where they found a new way to do it, and it's really exciting to see that happen. So it's a matter of, there are formulas, and people will tell you about how to do a one-act structure and make a major event happen by page 10 and all that. All of that is bullshit. If you have a script that's terrific and breaks all those rules, if it's entertaining and compelling, that's what matters to the people who read them. Because there are people whose job, agents and their assistants and readers and the like, is to every weekend go through 100 scripts. So what's going to make your script stand out from every one of those 100 scripts where they take the first 5 pages and go, next? Because they can't read 120 pages 100 times over the weekend and get anywhere. So better to be compelling than fashionable.
Can you tell us about, I know you're doing Nightmare Cinema, is that
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, Nightmare Cinema is a horror anthology of 5 stories with 5 directors. And several years ago, I'd created a series called Masters of Horror. And the philosophy was get the greatest filmmakers in the world within the genre, let them do what they want to do. You're never going to have enough time and money to do everything, but give them creative freedom. They all had final cut. Everything was up to them as long as they could do it on time and on budget. And it was a concept that I'd worked on for a long time, and we got people to agree to, yeah, you can use my name if it goes, to get John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper and Stuart Gordon and John Landis and all these really great filmmakers, Dario Argento, Takashi Miike. We were able to do that, but the network, Showtime, that helped to finance it and license the show had to, pardon my French, fuck off. So basically, they could not tell us. There were no standards or practices because it was for pay TV, so there were no commercials, and we didn't have to worry about that. But we gave them creative freedom, and it worked great. So after the 2 seasons of that show ended, I came up with the idea of trying to do something international like that, where it would be a different, each week's show was shot in a different country by a director from that country. I've been to a lot of film festivals around the world, and I've learned how exciting the genre is around the world, and that it's not just aimed at teenagers. So there are very adult and complex stories being told. So we wanted to have a very broad umbrella of that. That was a little too ambitious for the industry and for the networks and everybody. So it's taken me a dozen years of how to format this and make it happen in the same way. I thought Nightmare Cinema Presents, a 90-minute feature that would go out theatrically maybe twice a year. We'd do a new one. And eventually what I came up with was to do it as an anthology feature with 5 stories all in one movie, and then with wraparounds that tie them together. So I wanted to get filmmakers who were representative of international film. So Joe Dante and I are the 2 token Americans. Then we have a Japanese director, Ryuhei Kitamura. We have a Cubano director, Alejandro Brugués. And we have a UK director, David Slade. And so we did it under very tight budgetary circumstances, but the lunatics ran the asylum, and we were able to do it our way, and we are hopefully closing our distribution deal today after a lot of work, and a movie that we're all really proud of, and it's been hitting the film festivals, the big genre festivals around the world, and I'm tired showing it, but it's gone over great. We're at 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is unheard of for a little horror genre, independent film, but something we're all really proud of and really excited by. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if you've had a lot of collaboration with other artists in creating a project, but that's certainly something I'm really interested in. And so, any insight to how to get that started, what to look for, or what to be concerned about that kind of thing?
A collaboration, you mean a co-writer or?
Could be co-writer, could be someone who wants to produce with me, that kind of thing.
Right. Well, the collaboration thing is interesting. I mean, you need to find somebody who's simpatico with you, who responds to what you respond to. I have done some co-writing. I usually write on my own, but I've partnered with people before. And it's always a compromise because you're not going to agree on everything. But as far as somebody you want to work with as a producer, who is established or isn't, if they're not established, then find out what they can offer to the collaboration. I mean, my biggest collaboration, I've directed more Stephen King projects than anybody else. And King as a collaborator is amazing. He's an incredibly generous writer and producer and knows the difference between books and movies. And, I didn't find him, but we were put together and it was a great marriage. We've done like 8 or 9 projects together and hopefully some in the future. But there's a few years between us in age, but we're basically the same generation. We have a lot of similar background, and our tastes are remarkably alike in many ways and remarkably unlike in others. But it's finding somebody who wants to work as hard as you do, who likes what you do and you like what they do. And I was going to say somebody you don't want to fight with, but sometimes that fighting is what you need to level the field, because one ego can overshadow another. And if your ideas are great and you back down all the time, it might be shitty. But you also have to know when somebody's got a better idea than yours. And, if the craft services guy makes a suggestion and it's a great one, you'd be foolish not to take it, And yet, if you're, in my case, I'm the director, if there's an idea that you're the only one who has the whole film in mind. Every actor, there's the joke that they look at the script and they go, oh, okay, my line, bullshit, my line. Everybody focuses on their own job. It's the production designer, it's the director of photography wanting to make beautiful images, all that. You're the only one who has the overall scope of the story told in mind. And so it's veering a little bit from the question you're asking, but film is a collaborative medium and you can't do it by yourself. And if you're only doing it for yourself, you're masturbating. So but, collaboration, you have to collaborate with people. And the more you do it through encouragement, if you're James Cameron, you can do whatever you want. And you can yell and scream and throw a tantrum, and people will do what you want. But they'll also not give their heart and soul for you. They'll do the least they have to do to not get yelled at. I'm just using him as an example because I've heard stories. I've never worked with him. But, well, they get to work on giant movies. And I'm sure that isn't always the case with the people who work for him, but he is known to have had a Titanic temper, and pun intended. But I think the best way to work with collaborators is to encourage them and let them know that they're a part of the process, and they're hired to do the best job because they're the best person for the job, and to let them know how much you appreciate that work and know that you're on their side and you're making each other look good. Actors need to know, they're very emotional. They have to be, because they have to be in touch with their rawest emotions to be really good at it, and yet they're judged on their looks, their personalities, everything. Oh, look, she's gained weight, that sort of thing. They need a safety net, and they need to know that you're there to protect them, and that they see from the inside out and you see from the outside in, and you have the overall picture in mind, so that there's one movie and everybody's making the same movie. And again, I got a little off track, but well, first of all, getting an actor attached to a film is virtually impossible if you don't have the film funded. And often the funding relies on having the actor so that they can make their international sales or whatever, if we're talking independent films. So I've been with 2 of the biggest agencies over the last 3 decades, and sometimes it's helped, but more often than not, it doesn't. But you need to have a greenlit project to be able to. There are exceptions, you know. If you can somehow get a script to an actor who's perfect for it, and they read it and go, they call their agent, "I've read this great script. Let's get this set up. I've got a housekeeping deal at Paramount. Let's get this in development." That sort of thing. But that's the hardest thing to do. Even doing it as long as I've done it, I've never had an actor attached themselves to anything until it was a go project, because they don't want to spin their wheels. They've got a slate of projects that are lined up for the next 2 years at least. And, you know, if something falls out, maybe they'll have the time. But getting a commitment to an actor who is a name and who is working is virtually impossible. But there are always those times where something different happens. You know, the rules break constantly. They're made of glass. Yeah.
Okay, let's say I wanted to make a movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say
Let's say that.
yeah. Let's say filmmakers wanted to make a movie.
Yeah.
If there was a 10-step thing, like say it was a step-by-step way to do it, what would be the 10-step? Like first get an actor, first get an agent, or
First, get a script.
okay, like say I have the script.
But, you know, just make sure it's the best thing, because you're only going to have one shot at who reads that script. When they read it, they're not going to want to say, you know, this is good, but give me the next draft after you've made it better. Know that it's the best that it can be, and then it becomes the magnet. Go ahead.
Yeah, like okay, like I have the best script I have.
Right.
But do I, like you said earlier, sometimes the film relies on having a big name.
Right.
The big name relies on having funding. So
Right.
if I was to do it, it's my first time.
Mm-hmm.
I would look for, I'd say, look for a funder, a producer, an agent, one of them. And getting that, what would be like the steps?
Well, the first thing would be to get somebody interested in the script. If somebody likes the script, you know, and that's trying to go through agents. There are books that tell you agents that will accept unsolicited material. A lot of agencies don't want anything to do. They don't want to be reading material that is not represented, because that representation is validation that the first step liked what you did. And most of the big agencies have departments that represent writers, directors, actors, but a lot of them specialize in those areas. The first thing is just getting somebody who cares to be interested in the script. If you want to do it independently, like I said, you've got all the tools on your Mac and on your iPhone, or you know, a Canon 5D or something like that you can do, and you find you're in Houston. There's a great pool of talent in Texas to draw from. Not your best friends, unless your best friends are the best actors in Houston. And, you know, go to Craigslist or go to Backpage, Backstage. Backpage, great, yeah. You know, audition people. Maybe get a local casting director, or, you know, find out if it's going to be a $10,000 movie that you can do yourself and you can raise funding locally, or if it's something of a larger scale, then it really is a matter of having somebody love your script. Because starting to put together a crew or a cast without any funding at all is really difficult, unless it's people like you who want to make their stand and make their movie and do the best work they can, because it'll be a calling card, or it will be, you know, blood simple, that somebody made entirely independently, and get it out there. So the script is by far the most important thing, because that's where it all starts. That's a blueprint. And, you know, I don't know if you're a cinematographer, you would do it yourself, or if you know people who are, or there are local people. If you wanted to put this together, you can make a film for, you know, almost nothing. It happens all the time. And then it becomes either a calling card, or if you're lucky, it hits pay dirt and gets distribution, and then that can lead to the next one. It never gets easier, and that's not discouraging, intended to be discouraging, but I've been doing it for 30 years now, and it took me 12 years to get Nightmare Cinema off the ground at a very low budget. The lowest budget I've ever had in my life, by the way, but it didn't matter, and it doesn't look like it. I shouldn't tell, but it was under $2 million. and that was for the whole feature film, 5 directors. The lowest budget because I started out as a director, as a union director on Amazing Stories. So I was working on a studio level, and this was done entirely independently. And it started out with a lower budget than that, but we got screwed over by our visual effects people. So, I mean, that's a professional movie with name directors, name cast, actors, all of that, because we were able to put it together because people had a proven track record. Joe Dante had made Gremlins and Inner Space and lots of big movies, and I have, and the other directors have as well. And there are actors who worked for scale for us because we'd worked with them before, and they're fantastic name actors. So it's a little bit different because we had a couple of things that put us a little ahead of the line in the independent world. And I know $2 million sounds like a lot of money, but shooting in Los Angeles with all really top professional people doing it, that's really cheap. Yeah.
Why horror? The cinema you chose, and when did you know it was a success?
Well, actually the first stuff that I was hired to do that was made that I'd worked on were with Steven Spielberg, so they were kind of family oriented. I'd written Batteries Not Included. I wrote Hocus Pocus for Disney around that time, and working on Amazing Stories. And I'd always been interested in horror. The first movie I ever saw on television when I was like 6 years old was Son of Kong, the sequel to King Kong. And, I was always drawn to it, and I think, being an outsider, I talked about this last night at the Horror-thon, is a lot of horror fans are outsiders, that horror chooses you rather than you choose horror because you identify with that feeling of otherness, that, you relate more to the monster than to Dr. Frankenstein. Alienation, I think, can be an incredibly painful thing, but it's also a great source of creativity. And I don't think the greatest painters, authors, filmmakers are the people who had the happiest of lives, I think challenges makes you deeper. In the case of horror films, so much of it deals with death that I think the best movies are made by people who've lived lives rather than base them on other movies and TV shows. Okay. But it's true. I mean, and it's painful. I made a movie a dozen years or so ago called Riding the Bullet based on a Stephen King story, but it was only 30 pages long, and I turned it into a feature script in a different era that was inspired by, the glorification of death in horror movies. Yay, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's so recreational. But once you're brushed with it, it becomes something a lot deeper. And Riding the Bullet is about that. I've lost 2 brothers and a sister. I've lost both parents. And I think that if you let it, it deepens you as both a human being and as an artist. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, kind of going off of why horror, main thing is, whenever I watch horror movies, in the cinema specifically,
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be, I feel as filmmakers, we kind of have a superpower. We have the ability to manipulate emotions.
That's the best way to put it. Excellent.
Momentarily, and I think in a cinema, it is, the energy is in the air. And for horror movies, the energy is very volatile and very nuclear kind of way. Do you think that magic of cinemas and movie theaters is taken away by the way films are distributed nowadays? Where it's people, for years, there's been a steady decline in people going to movie theaters and people more staying indoors. Do you think people need to get out more and try to go?
Well, that's an excellent point, and very, very clearly seen. And it is true, but horror, like comedy, is one of those things that's best shared with an audience because fear and laughter are both contagious. And I think there will always be group viewings in movie theaters, in cinemas and the like. But the challenge for, if you are going to work within this genre, is how do you transcend the big screen to a smaller screen, or whatever screen is your movie is being consumed on, and make it effective as well. And one of the best ways to do that is to not rely on the tricks of the cinema as much as on the characters and the story and where it takes you and how deeply involved you become. Because John Carpenter once told me that I could run black film, back in the days when you ran film through a projector, I could just run black film through a projector, black leader, and have one white frame with a loud noise on that white frame, and it would make you jump. That's not the same as scaring you. You know, the jump scare with the hand on the shoulder or the cat jumping out of the trash can and the loud wing, you know, that'll make you jump, but that's not going to haunt you as you walk home from the cinema or as you turn off your iPad and go to sleep at night. You know, something that lives on after the credits roll. And the way I think, and certainly my attempt, is to do it through the people. And we, as an audience, are the people on the screen. We are the surrogates. And if you can make people feel that they're participating in that story, whether it's horror or any other, but specifically horror, the identification, I think A Quiet Place is a great example of that. You know, it's a really unique and fantastic movie, really scary, PG-13, there's no blood to speak of, but it's so personal. It feels so human. And this is done by a director who was best known as a sitcom actor, not a horror fan at all, but did his homework. You know, he'd done a couple of romantic comedies, but it was, yeah, there are jump scares, but horror, effective horror that lives on is much more than the jump scares. And engagement, like we were talking about earlier, I think is our way around the declining cinema. But I think horror is also a perennial thing. It goes up and down in waves, but it always comes back. Westerns don't come back. You know, Hard Eight, or the Tarantino movie, The Hateful Eight. That was a great one, but it didn't follow. There weren't follow-up westerns in its wake. But with horror, I think the engagement is something that people want to be scared, and they also want to bring their friends along and see if they can take it. You know, it's also that kind of, oh yeah, when The Exorcist came out, I was a kid, and it was, you know, it was a test of your strength if you could go and see The Exorcist all the way through, and it, you know, you watch it now, and it's 45 years ago. It's kind of easy to do, but in those days, it was a real test of your manhood or womanhood. So, yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell me, in your opinion, what would make a good psychological thriller? Because, like, as you were saying, you know, the way you connect the audiences to the characters, it's a better way of, like, making them and thus scaring them, even, like, when they leave the theater.
Well, for me, you know, what frightens you? If it frightens you, it's going to frighten other people as well. Fear is universal. Maybe not specific things. Some men are more scared of snakes than women, believe it or not, and insects and things like that. But we screened something at Horrorthon last night, was a Masters of Horror episode that was based on a short story I'd written, and I adapted it like 20 years later. And basically, it had to do with impossible love. And somebody starts receiving senses from someone else, somewhere else. They don't know who it is or what it is, what's going on. At first, it's just tasting chocolate when there's no chocolate in his mouth. But he knows he's tasting chocolate, and then it's gone. And then it's a sensation of, you know, he smells a scent that makes him sneeze that he's allergic to, but it's not there when he's there. He starts to see briefly through somebody else's eyes, and then he's recently divorced. The wife has a son, so he's really alone, really an empty vessel, and feeling pain. And suddenly he sees through this other person's eyes, it's a woman, as her reflection flashes past on a mirror in the bathroom, and she's beautiful. And he starts to feel connected to her. He starts feeling her emotions as well. And this is a guy who's kind of been devoid of emotions for a while because they're too painful. So suddenly, here's this beautiful woman. He's feeling her doesn't know if she's experiencing the other end of it. So one night he experiences her being made love to by her lover, which is, you know, to be a man penetrated vaginally is not something we're all used to. But, you know, it's shocking, and it's over quickly. And then he starts feeling her writing love notes and sentimental and emotional things. And the next time he gets a transmission from her is in bed. He experiences her as she is murdering this lover who is on top of her. And he feels what it's like to have the blood running down his arms. And it's really a gruesome murder, and it's horrible. But then all the transmissions stop. And he doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't know how to process it. He fell in love with her because he experienced her from the inside out. And no man has ever experienced anybody else, the other side of a relationship, from the inside out, literally and emotionally. So he tries to take all of those senses, the 5 senses that he received from her briefly, and use them as clues to try and track her down. This kind of chocolate, the glimpse of a license plate that he saw, where in the world she is. And he does go there and finds her. And to me, that's a psychological thriller that feels very personal, that you can identify with. And the sexual element of it really freaked people out. And I love that. Yeah. So there's an example of one thing that I did. So, yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, you know, again, back to we're aspiring filmmakers. And what kind of agent do we need, or how do we find an agent to help us?
Well, it depends on what you have. Are you peddling a script? Are you peddling? Do you have a short that will impress? If you have a short, you'd better have a feature script as well, because agents are not in the market of turning short filmmakers into feature filmmakers. But if you have a short or shorts that show what you can do, and you have a script that's really good to follow up on. But I wouldn't go to CAA or Paradigm or the top agents. There are a lot of boutique agencies that look for young talent. They go to get them in festivals. They're all around the world, especially genre festivals, they don't have Western festivals or comedy festivals and like the genre they do. And they're big and they're valuable. And win awards at festivals, do something notable that makes it stand out from everything else. And go to the boutique agencies. Like I said, there are books that tell you what agencies will accept submissions and are looking for it. And be dogged, but not overly tenacious to where you're an asshole. People want to work with people they want to work with, and people they feel are talented and have something that represents what they do. And it's different from everybody else's because everybody comes to LA with a script in their back pocket. And so it's got to stand out. Maybe the subject matter, maybe it's a script that never in 100 years would get made, but it will arrest your attention. And it'll go, wow, this guy's good. I wonder what he would do with Saw 9, So, yeah.
One of the things that I'm working on doing is I have a script, a feature-length script, but I was thinking about making a portion of it, a small portion of it, into a short film. And then using that, maybe trying to attract people, attract interest, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that's something people will make a trailer for a movie that doesn't exist yet. And that's a really great way to do it. If you do a short, from that script, if it feels self-contained, to make it exciting, to make people realize what you have in mind is something that not only could be made under the circumstances under which they're working, whether it's budgetary or whatever, and they see that you have the talent to put it together and they like the script. I think that's a great way to do it. Yeah, a show reel.
The industry in Texas, period, because I heard you call out several cities, and the industry in Texas, is it weak or?
Well, there's a lot of production here. It's just I don't know where the beginning source is, where you get the funding, where the studios are all based in L.A. or New York, and the creative heads are mostly there. So I don't know the industry in Texas so much. I know that there's a lot of production here, and yeah.
It would be like if I want to embark on establishing studios, buying land, and trying to get the industry bigger, would that be a good idea?
Well, it depends on your access to money. If you want to build your own studios or the like, I think that's a really big undertaking and a really big gamble. Rather partner with somebody who's already doing that. I have a feeling there are probably plenty of available sound stages, most of which have probably were metamorphosed from warehouses, which is often the case. But if you want to make movies, it's the material, not the machinery. That's the most important thing.
So let's have two more questions.
Sure.
I'd like to show your Nightmare Theater.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. One kind of one of the final questions. If we could go back in time to your 16-year-old self, what would be the three things you would tell yourself?
I will get laid. No, I even though I didn't start making money as a screenwriter until I was 33 years old, that felt like, as somebody who started at 12 writing and was writing for 20 years, I never did it to make it. I thought it would happen, that not make it, but I would be able to make my living doing it. I don't know that I would want to change anything as far as career and the like, because everything fed everything else. Being in the band was an amazing experience at 18 through 25. And they all feed each other. That's a really interesting question that's really difficult to answer, because I like the trajectory that my life took, despite being penniless, a lot of it. It was great. It was really great, and I learned a lot, and there was a lot of pain, The one thing I think is, and I'll repeat it, is to not live your life in front of a screen, but, know and love movies and all of that, but be aware of the world around you and the relationships around you, too. Because that's what is going to make your work really great, is if it feels lived in. One more? Yeah.
Is there sort of like a degree of separation you have to put between yourself and your work when you put it out there?
Well, you need to have the skin of a rhinoceros if you do work for public consumption, because it is your heart on your sleeve. It's even worse for an actor, because they have to be emotional enough to portray the widest range of emotions and strong enough to be judged constantly. The same as a writer or director or whatever. You can't blame the other guy for not liking your work. It's not their fault that they don't like your work. And it's going to hurt sometimes, and especially if it's really, really personal. My biggest flop was the one that's most personal to me, Riding the Bullet. And, it's something that came from the heart, and nobody liked that. So, but yeah, you do have to separate yourself, and yet not during the writing process, but the pitching and the selling process. Realize that you're going to get turned down. No matter how good it is, people are going to say no, particularly if it's not like whatever is hot at the moment. But just be strong and have the, not cavalier or fuck you attitude, but know that there are thousands of other places to take it. You will be judged, and you will be judged harshly, because you're going to be not compared to other people who are trying to make it, but you're going to be compared with the best screenwriters and directors out there making movies, because they all want to make more movies too. So it's not, here's the beginner's pile and here's the pro pile. They're all mixed together, and that's what you're competing with, not just everybody in this room, but everybody in Hollywood. So, all right. Sure.
What about these little buy-in agencies? Little buy-in agencies,
I don't know, paying for an agent is not.
and that's what I've heard.
Yeah,
That's what
I
I've
mean,
heard.
if an agent is, they make money when restrictions, you know, they take their chance. And managers get paid.
Okay.
But managers sometimes will work harder than one person. Agents are much more easy this way. But anybody who charges you to run a script is
Scammer. Okay, because they got these agencies that set you up a profile and say you gotta pay this $40 a month and month to month.
you know, none of the pros.
It does,
You know,
okay.
why would,
That's what I wanted to know.
why would
Okay.
everything that goes through agencies, why would they want to?
That's
Don't
all right.
think they.
Okay.
So go ahead and say thank you for being here.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you, yeah.
Take this. It's,
Very educational,
No, here's what you-
informational.
see if we can. That's it?
Uh-oh, here we go.
Let's, the audio is on, right? Yeah, we turn it on. System is powering on.
Okay.
I think it's powering on, right?
We should have did a test run.
Is it the right input? I see you see the time.
Sorry, guys, technical.
It'd be surprising if there weren't technical difficulties.
Oh, you've got it up.
Oh, there it is.
Ah.
It was a loose cord.
News cord. Okay, so let's fire this.
Am I getting part of the sound too?
Yeah. This must be just a bad link. But is this the same, this might be the same. No, this is the same, I think that's just a bad link.
One on the recorder.
HCC has like the best Wi-Fi I've ever.
Okay.
Sounds like we got all the sense.
apologies. At least that came up. So,
No worries.
sorry. Is there any follow-up, one question about this Nightmare Cinema? Anybody?
The 2000s were an odd time, but the one thing that was consistent was the slew of...
Well, it'll be in theaters. We're just finding out, like I said, I think today we're closing our deal in the next couple of months. We're excited about it.
Well, I have
Any uncle?
actually, I might go on to one. I'm an actor, and I discovered in my attempts at directing that sometimes there seems to be a fine line between being a puppet master and being a good collaborator.
Directing actors, you mean?
Yeah, like
Or directing a crew?
As an actor, as a director who's also an actor.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like there's a fine line between you showing little bits here and there. Do you think it's important to give actors their space and their freedom to develop on their own, or do you think it's important as a director to be kind of strict and kind of?
I think being autocratic with actors is the worst thing you could possibly do. They need to trust you. They need to know that you have their best performance at heart, and how to get to it, like I was talking about before, is through encouragement. And every actor is different. You know, Pierce Brosnan is somebody who's a terrific actor who doesn't really need much input once you understand. But those discussions before you're shooting are really important. And you hire an actor to play the part because they're really good and they're right for it, or they bring something entirely unexpected to it that you didn't when you're in the casting process. Somebody will read for you and go, I never thought of approaching it this way, and it's great. Or you don't like that approach, but you ask for a different one to see how malleable they are and how willing to change and able to change. Because I've worked with actors that are really great, but they can't adjust at all, and other actors who can adjust so much that left to their own devices, it's not the same movie in every scene that they do, because you're shooting the scenes out of order and all that. But you know, different actors require different handling. Some of them want you to be their dad, and some of them don't want anything except, you know, I need you to move over here a little more technical things, or just give them an idea like, well, why don't you try this? Because what I had in mind as the writer was this. And if you are indeed the writer, that puts you at a great advantage too, because you have the respect of having created the material. But I think, you know, I've worked with really difficult actors that people call difficult, and had great experiences with them, because often it becomes contentious when there's an autocratic director and they want it their way. Then why hire the actor? You know, go hire a CGI impersonation. But yeah, it's a great question, and coming at it from an actor's perspective is really important, because you think about how you would like to collaborate with a director. And again, for me, and not all directors feel this way, it's through encouragement and letting them know that I am their safety net. If they do something, you have to be fearless to be a really good actor. You have to be willing to be embarrassed and willing to show the most vulnerable parts of who you are and take it. And you need to know that the director is not going to let you make a fool of yourself, that you can be vulnerable and you can be open and you can be an open wound, but you're safe.